The landlord said she owed him more than rent. The carpenter said she owed him nothing. The trouble began in early November, when the roof of the boarding house on Plank Street started leaking into the room where Sadie Culver and her mother lived. The leak was in the corner above the bed, and it came through in a steady drip whenever it rained, which in the town of Varden, Tennessee, in November, was often, 3 days out of 5, sometimes 4, the rain falling gray and constant and relentless, from skies that looked like the underside of a dull tin lid. The drip soaked the quilt and the pillow and the mattress ticking, until the corner of the bed smelled of mildew, and the mildew crept along the wall in a dark stain that Sadie scrubbed with lye water every morning, and that returned every night like an argument that refused to stay settled. Sadie was 26. Her mother, Lenore Culver, was 53 and had been ill for 2 years. A wasting sickness in the lungs that the doctor in Varden called consumption, and that had reduced Lenore from a strong woman who had run a seamstress shop for 20 years to a thin figure propped against pillows in a damp bed, coughing into a cloth that she hid from Sadie because the cloth showed blood and because Lenore believed that hiding the blood would prevent Sadie from worrying, which it did not, because Sadie found the cloths in the wash and counted the spots the way a sailor counts clouds before a storm. The boarding house belonged to a man named Orson Platt. Platt had owned 3 buildings in Varden: the boarding house, a dry goods store, and a warehouse near the rail depot. And he managed all 3 with the same philosophy, which was that the purpose of property was to produce income, and that the maintenance of property was an expense that reduced income and was therefore to be avoided whenever possible. The roof of the boarding house had needed repair for 2 years. Platt had not repaired it. The windows of the boarding house let in drafts that made the candles gutter. Platt had not fixed them. The staircase to the 2nd floor was missing a tread on the 4th step. Platt had not replaced it. These were not oversights or lapses of attention. They were policies. Sadie paid her rent on time every month, $4 for the room, which she earned by doing laundry for 3 families on the east side of town, and by sewing piecework for the tailor on Main Street, work that kept her hands busy from 5 in the morning until 8 at night, and that paid just enough to cover the rent and the food and the medicine that the doctor prescribed for Lenore's cough, a tincture of honey and whiskey, and something else that the doctor would not name, that cost 75 cents a bottle and lasted barely a week. In November, when the leak worsened and the mildew spread and Lenore's cough deepened from the damp, Sadie went to Platt and asked him to fix the roof. She asked politely. She asked directly and clearly. She asked the way a woman asks who has learned that directness is more effective than pleading, and who has also learned that neither directness nor pleading is particularly effective when the person being asked does not want to hear the question. Platt said no. He said the roof was adequate. He said that all roofs leaked in November, and that the leak was not his responsibility but hers, because she had chosen to live in the room, and the room was the room, and if the room did not suit her, she was welcome to find another room, knowing full well that there was no other room in Varden that she could afford, knowing that the knowing was his leverage, and the leverage was the point. 2 weeks later, Platt came to collect the December rent. He knocked on the door. Sadie opened it. Platt looked past her into the room, at the damp bed, at the mildew on the wall, at Lenore coughing under a quilt, and he said something that changed the nature of the arrangement. $4 is not enough, he said. The rent is going up. $5, starting this month. You cannot raise the rent. The roof leaks. The room is worse than it was when I moved in. The rent is $5, or you are out by Friday. He looked at her when he said it. He looked at her in a way that Sadie understood immediately, because women understand that look, the look that says the number is negotiable if the payment takes a different form, the look that turns a financial transaction into something else, something that a man like Orson Platt believes he is entitled to because he owns the building, and because ownership, in his understanding, extends to everything and everyone inside it. Sadie closed the door. She did not give him the $5. She did not give him anything. She stood behind the closed door with her hands shaking, and her mother coughing behind her, and the mildew creeping up the wall, and she understood that she had until Friday, and that Friday was 3 days away, and that 3 days was not enough time to find another room, or another town, or another life. The carpenter's shop was on the corner of Plank Street and the Knoxville Road. The carpenter's name was Webb Anslow. He was 32 years old, and he had come to Varden from the hill country of North Carolina 3 years earlier, because there was work in Varden. The railroad was expanding, and the town was growing. And growing towns need carpenters, the way growing children need shoes, constantly and urgently. He was tall and broad-shouldered and quiet, and he did careful, honest work, and he lived above his shop in a clean room with a single window that looked out over the main street, and the living above the shop gave him a view of Plank Street and the boarding house and the comings and goings of its tenants, which he observed without particular interest, the way a person observes weather. He had noticed Sadie Culver. He had noticed her the way that a person notices someone who passes the same window at the same time every day, gradually without intention, until the noticing becomes expectation, and the expectation becomes something that the person does not examine too closely, because the examining might reveal something that requires action, and action requires courage, and courage requires risk. And Webb Anslow was a man who measured risk the way he measured lumber, carefully, twice, before cutting. He had noticed the leak. He could see the water stain on the exterior wall of the boarding house from his shop window, and the stain had been growing since September, and he knew what a growing water stain meant, because he was a carpenter, and carpenters understand the language of buildings the way doctors understand the language of bodies. The crack is the cough, the stain is the fever, the sag is the disease that has gone too deep to fix with surface work. He did not know about Platt's visit. He did not know about the raised rent, or the look, or the Friday deadline. He knew none of this until Thursday morning, when Sadie Culver knocked on the door of his shop at 7 o'clock, with her eyes red, and her hands still, and her voice level, and said, "Mr. Anslow, I need a carpenter. The roof of our room leaks, and my mother is ill, and the landlord will not fix it, and I cannot pay you, but I can sew for you, or clean for you, or do whatever work you need done in exchange for the repair." Webb looked at her. He looked at her eyes, which were red. He looked at her hands, which were still, the forced stillness of a person who is holding herself together by holding everything still. He looked at her face, which was composed and pale and determined, the face of a woman who has decided to ask for help, and who is paying for the asking with every ounce of pride she has. "Show me the roof," he said. She showed him the roof. She showed him the room, the leak, the mildew, the damp bed. Lenore propped against pillows with a cloth pressed to her mouth. Webb looked at the roof from the outside. He climbed up the ladder and examined the shingles and the flashing and the rot that had spread along the ridge beam, and the rot told him the story the way rot always tells the story, of neglect, of a landlord who had chosen income over maintenance, of a building that was slowly failing because no one who owned it cared whether it stood. "This is not a patch job," he said when he came down. "The ridge beam is rotted through. The flashing is gone. Half the shingles on the north slope need replacing. This is a full repair. How much would it cost? If I were billing the landlord, $12 in materials and 4 days of labor. But I am not billing the landlord. I am doing it because a sick woman is sleeping in a wet bed, and that is not something I am able to know about and not fix. I told you I cannot pay you. And I told you I am not billing anyone. The roof needs fixing. I fix things. That is what I do." He started the next morning, Friday, the day Platt had given as the deadline. Webb was on the roof at 6 o'clock, with his tools and his lumber and his cedar shingles, and the being on the roof at 6 o'clock on Friday morning was not a coincidence. He had thought about the timing. He had understood, from what Sadie had told him, and from what she had not told him, that Friday was significant, and that the significance involved Platt, and that being on the roof when Platt arrived would establish something that needed establishing. Platt arrived at 9. He walked up Plank Street with the stride of a man who owns buildings and who is accustomed to having his deadlines met. He saw Webb on the roof. He stopped. "What are you doing on my roof?" Platt said. "Fixing it," Webb said. He did not stop working. He did not come down. He drove a nail into a shingle with 2 precise strokes, and reached for the next one. I did not hire you to fix the roof. No, you did not. You chose not to fix the roof, while a woman with consumption sleeps in a room full of mildew. I chose differently. This is my building. This is your building, and this is my labor and my lumber and my time, and none of the three belong to you, and the roof is going to be fixed whether you hired me or not, because a sick woman should not sleep in the rain. Platt looked at Webb on the roof. He looked at the lumber and the shingles and the tools. He looked at Sadie, who had come out onto the boarding house steps and who was standing there watching, and the watching was steady, and the steadiness was new, because yesterday she had been alone, and today she was not. She owes me $5, Platt said. She owes you $4. The rent is $4. The rent has been $4 since she moved in, and I would argue that a landlord who lets a roof rot over a paying tenant's head owes the tenant a good deal more than the tenant owes him, but that is a conversation for a lawyer, and I am a carpenter, and right now I am fixing a roof. Platt left. He left because there was nothing to be done with a man on a roof who would not come down, and who had lumber and nails and the particular calm stubbornness of a person who has decided what is right and who does not require anyone's agreement to proceed with it. He left, and he did not come back that day or the next. Webb fixed the roof. He worked for 4 days, replacing the ridge beam, laying new flashing, stripping and reshingling the entire north slope. He fixed the window that let in the draft. He replaced the missing tread on the staircase. He did not ask permission for any of it, because permission was Platt's to give, and Platt would not have given it. And the not asking was itself a statement about whose authority mattered when a building was failing and a woman was sick. On the 4th day, when the roof was done and the room was dry and Lenore was sleeping in a bed that did not smell of mildew for the first time in 2 months, Sadie came to Webb's shop. She stood in the doorway. The shop smelled of cedar shavings and linseed oil. Webb was at his bench, planing a board for a cabinet he was building for the hardware store. "The roof does not leak," she said. "Good. You spent 4 days and $12 on a woman you do not know. I know you well enough. You do not know me at all." Webb set down the plane. He looked at Sadie standing in his doorway, in the light from the street, with her hands at her sides and her chin up, and the particular expression of a woman who has been helped and who is trying to determine whether the help is a gift or a debt, because her experience has taught her that everything is a debt and that debts are always collected. "I know that you do laundry for 3 families, and sew piecework for the tailor, and pay your rent on time, and take care of your mother, and walk past my window every morning at 5 o'clock, when it is still dark, because you have to start the first wash before the water cools. I know that you are the most hard-working person on Plank Street, and that you live in the worst room on Plank Street, and that the 2 facts do not belong together. I know enough. I owe you something. You owe me nothing. That is the point. Platt believes everyone owes him something. I believe you owe me nothing. The difference between those 2 beliefs is the difference between a man who lets a roof rot and a man who fixes it, and I would rather be the man who fixes it." Sadie looked at him for a long time. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they have been afraid of wanting, carefully, with the slow recognition that the wanting is not dangerous, and the thing being wanted is real. "My mother would like to meet you," she said. "She says the man who fixed the roof should at least come for supper. I would like that. Tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock. I will be there." He was there. He was there at 6 o'clock with a loaf of bread he had bought from the baker and a jar of honey from the mercantile, and Lenore was sitting up in her dry bed with a shawl around her shoulders and color in her cheeks that had not been there a week ago, and Sadie had set the small table with 2 plates and a cup, and the room smelled of stew instead of mildew, and the smell of stew in a dry room was the smell of a problem solved. And Webb Anslow sat down at the table and ate supper with Sadie Culver and her mother, in the room he had fixed, under the roof he had mended. And the mending of things was not finished. The mending of the roof was finished, but the mending of everything else was just beginning, and the beginning was enough.